Vanishing Church. If you would like to enter to win that, and there might be a flood of people going to the back table here, you can sign up on one of the pieces of paper back there, and we'll be raffling that off at the end of the evening. Good evening and welcome to No Room for Compromise, Religious Polarization in the United States with Dr. Ryan Burge. I'm Daniel Bennett, and I have the pleasure of serving as a professor of political science at John Brown University, where I'm also the director of the Center for Faith and Flourishing. Founded in 2019, CFF encourages students and the broader community to ask some of today's most pressing questions at the intersection of faith and public life. At the heart of our mission is the belief that human flourishing for individuals and their communities is best realized in a free society marked by a commitment to liberty, the marketplace of ideas, and democratic citizenship. In addition to hosting events like this one, CFF supports students and community learning efforts of all kinds, from hosting reading groups and seminars to supporting student travel to national and international conferences. And as always, I want to thank Michelle Sumner and Hope Brittenham for their work in coordinating and planning the logistics behind this evening's event. And I'm also thankful for the very many faculty and students who met with our speaker at several points throughout the day. Tonight's event is about something that is both easy to grasp, yet difficult to understand. That is the state of religion in 21st century America. Depending on your sources and perspective, the United States is either in a period of increasing secularization or transformative religious revival. Young people are either abandoning religion in droves or finding new and meaningful ways to engage with religion. Evangelical Christianity is either a flourishing majority or an embattled minority. What exactly are we to believe about the state of American religion, both today and in the years ahead? This is an especially important question considering the political contours of American religion, which is increasingly polarized across denominational and party lines. In fact, I'd argue that the future of American religion is significant for the future of the American political experiment. It's hard to imagine a better speaker to help us sort through these sorts of questions. Dr. Ryan Burge is a professor of practice at Washington University's Danforth Center on Religion and Politics. He earned his PhD in political science from Southern Illinois University, which is where I first met him over 16 years ago. Yeah, it's rough. In the years since, he's made a name for himself as a trusted data analyst on all things religion, sharing and explaining all sorts of data in his popular Substack newsletter, Graphs About Religion, which you all should subscribe to. He has been featured in a variety of national media, including 60 Minutes, CBS Evening News, and the New York Times, to name just a few. Dr. Burge has also appeared very recently, within the last couple of weeks, on two podcasts some of you might know. The Holy Post, where he spoke with Skye Jethani, and Interesting Times, where New York Times columnist Rouse Douthat called him, and I'm quoting here, the best data analyst tracking trends in American religion right now. Dr. Burge is the author of several books and many peer-reviewed articles. His latest book is The Vanishing Church: How the Hollowing Out of Moderate Congregations is Hurting Democracy, Faith, and Us. And we will be giving away a signed copy at the conclusion of tonight's event. So stick around for that, and at some point this evening, make your way to the back table and sign up for a chance to win that. As for the order for the evening, Dr. Burge will begin with some remarks on religious polarization in the United States. After 30 or 40 minutes or so, I'll get the ball rolling with a couple of questions before turning things over to you for your questions. Be sure to be thinking what you'd like to ask, clarify, or challenge. I know Dr. Burge is looking forward to fielding your questions. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ryan Burge.
That means that Dan and I are about 32 years old. Right, Dan? 16 years? We went to PhD programs very young. We were prodigies. So glad to be with all of you, and a pleasure to get to talk about something that's deeply interesting to me and also relevant to my life, which is what's happening to American religion, with American religion, about American religion. And so what I'm going to show you is sort of the key argument from my book that just came out, The Vanishing Church. The initial title of the book, which my publisher rejected and you all will love, was called The Death of Polite Religion and the Future of America. That's a good title, right? Yeah, Well, guess what? The PR people disagreed with that. And then at one point it was going to be called The Big Church Sort, and then that somehow went away, and now we end up with The Vanishing Church. So the title of the talk today is No Room for Compromise, Religious Polarization in the United States. So the genesis of this book actually goes back to stuff I read in graduate school. This is a great book by Morris Fiorina called The Culture War, where he basically makes a point of saying that America is not that polarized. If you actually look at rank and file Americans on all kinds of social issues, economic issues, and so on, what you'll find is that the average American is not really that different than the other average American. It's just we're seeing the institutions of America be polarized. So keep that idea in your head for a minute, because we'll get back to that. That's a thought that always stuck deeply in my conscience. And then there's this book. Anybody read this book? What's the Matter with Kansas by Thomas Frank? This book sold a bunch of copies. And one of my core memories is when Thomas Frank went on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart to talk about this book. His thesis was that the Republican Party basically duped a lot of people living in Kansas to vote for them because of abortion and same-sex marriage, and really all Republicans wanted to do was cut their taxes for rich people, not even them. And you know what the funny part about that book is? It was completely wrong, and yet it sold 100,000 copies. And this is the book that I thought about a lot in grad school. I wanted to write a book like What's the Matter with Kansas, except it would be correct and true. A great book by Liliana Mason called Uncivil Agreement, which if you're into political science, you've probably read this book. And then Ezra Klein's fine volume, Why We're Polarized, which popularized the academic literature around the topic of polarization. There's also John Compton's The End of Empathy, Michelle Margolis from Politics to the Pews, both fine books written by academic scholars, but they all brought me to two central questions that I try to answer in my book. The first is, how is religion contributing to or mitigating polarization in the United States? And then what impacts will this have on democracy? My contribution to this literature is we talk a lot in America about political polarization. We do not talk nearly enough in America about how that polarization has been driven, at least in part, by religious polarization, how churches have gone left or right. And by the way, this is not just some academic exercise for me. I was a pastor for about 20 years. Starting when I was 20 years old until I was 42 years old, I was a pastor on staff of 3 different mainline American Baptist churches in rural southern Illinois. My last church I pastored for 17 and a half years until we closed our doors in July of 2024. A church that had been established in 1868, held our last worship service, and I was their pastor. I've been on staff of 3 churches, and 2 of them have closed down. I am the least successful pastor in the history of the world. If you would like your church to close, just hire me and wait. It won't take that long. So I take an approach to this that's much more than just numbers and graphs, although I do love numbers and graphs. I take this as a personal mission to help us understand the role that American religion plays in American civic and political life, because it's more than just about Jesus. Although it certainly is about Jesus, the church has always played a wider role in American society, and when churches like mine close, we're all worse for it. And we don't even realize what's changing until it's too late. So here's my thesis. This is what the future of American religion looks like. On one side, you're going to have a whole bunch of very religious, very conservative people. And when I say that, I don't just mean evangelicals. I actually mean all kinds of religious groups like evangelicals, but also traditional Catholics and Orthodox Christians and Latter-day Saints and Muslims. One of the key moments that really set this book in motion in my mind was when I read a story from the Guardian newspaper from Dearborn, Michigan. And they were talking about book bans in the public schools. And a lot of evangelicals got up and argued in favor of removing books that talked about gender and sexuality. We would expect that, but standing right behind them in line were Muslims saying the exact same thing. And it made me realize something very important, which is that for a long time, religious groups didn't like each other, but now they realize the enemy of your enemy is your friend. And if really the nuns, the non-religious people are our enemy, we need to unite together as a united front to sort of go against these. I remember when I was growing up, Southern Baptists didn't like Catholics very much. You don't hear a whole lot of that rhetoric anymore, because what we realize is, wow, it's easy to yell when we're 90% of America. It's a little bit different when you're 60% of America. So these groups are going to find common cause around certain issues. Now, on the other side, you've got a growing number of people who are very secular and very liberal, atheists, agnostics, nothing in particular, spiritual but not religious. And these people, as I'll tell you in a minute, might be just as intolerant as people on the right side of the political spectrum, just in a different direction. And the bigger issue is there'll be nothing in between. There'll be no kind of religious institution or organization, house of worship, where you've got people on the left and the right coming together to, and by the way, the subtitle of my book has the hollowing out of moderate congregations. I don't mean everyone's a moderate there. I wanted to say politically heterogeneous congregations, but guess what? The PR people didn't like that very much. So we got moderate congregations. The congregations I'm talking about, the traditions I'm talking about, are where Republicans and Democrats sit side by side on Sunday morning, rub shoulders with each other, take communion with each other, serve the community together. Those are the kind of churches, like the church I had, those are the kind of churches that are declining the fastest in America. And what we're going to be left with are very secular, very liberal people, and very religious, very conservative people, and nothing in between. Let's start with evangelicals. Have you heard of these people before? It's funny because like 25 years ago, the word evangelical wasn't even used that much, and now it's become ubiquitous in the conversation. I love this graph because I call it like a Rorschach test. You can see in, those ink blot tests, they used to do like psychiatrists. What do you see in here, a dog or a cloud? I show this to my atheist friends, and they say, look, evangelicals are down from 30% to 17%. And that's certainly a perspective. But you know what the other perspective is? The share of Americans evangelical is actually the same today as it was 50 years ago. So we talk about religious decline. I think we need to be careful, right, about what kind of religious decline we're talking about, because evangelicals are actually doing quite fine. There are more, numerically speaking, evangelicals in America today than there were 50 years ago. You know, and I think in many ways they're actually taking up a larger share of the American consciousness today than they have at any point in our history. So they're numerically large and also influential in how we talk about religion and these kind of issues. Here's what a lot of people don't know about white evangelicals, though. In the 1970s, a majority of white evangelicals were Democrats. Feels like so long ago now, doesn't it? Right? A different world. And even there were more Democrat white evangelicals and Republican white evangelicals all the way through the mid-1980s, even during Reagan's first term in office. And even in the early 1990s, they were about equal in share. That's not that long ago. But as you can see, from that point forward, the Republican share goes up and up and up. The Democrat share goes down and down and down. And now we see the white evangelical movement is about as politically homogenous, large religious group as we've ever seen in the history of modern polling. They are the tip of the spear for the Republican Party. 38% of Donald Trump's votes in 2024 came from white evangelicals. They are the most important religious voting bloc in America today. And they will remain in that position for years to come. So to make this really simple, I just generated a polarization score. And all that is just subtracting the share of one party from the share of the other party. So if your group is 45% Republicans and 45% Democrats, what's your polarization score? Math is hard. 0. Good answer. So 0 means you're completely politically divided, right? As many Republicans as many Democrats. And you can see that in the 1970s, there was some polarization, which, by the way, it was Democrats more than Republicans in those days. And then you can see in the late 1980s, the polarization of white evangelicals in some years is less than 5. So almost perfectly politically divided. And then you see what happens after that. That number just goes up and up and up. And the polarization score of white evangelicals in 2022 was 46, the highest that it's ever been by a factor of about 20 points. White evangelicals have never been more politically unified in our lifetimes than they are right now. One thing I tell my students often, and I'll tell you, is it's not always been this way, right? Our current moment is not the always moment. For a period of time, evangelicals are actually fairly politically divided. And you can also see this in stories about what evangelicals are up to. Every piece of data I've ever looked at tells us that white evangelicals, the Southern Baptists, are more conservative today than at any point in history. And what's funny is if you tell them that, they think I'm lying to them. That you know why there's a group of people who believe the Southern Baptist Convention has lost 3.8 million members because they've become too woke over the last 15 or 20 years. That is empirically demonstrably false, by the way, but they won't listen to me. You can see it in what they're doing. They passed a resolution against in vitro fertilization, which, by the way, 60% of white evangelicals know someone who's used in vitro fertilization. The policies they're taking. The abolitionist movement, which is an idea that we should criminalize every part of abortion, including the person that drives you to the clinic, the nurse, the receptionist, and the doctor, along with the woman for seeking an abortion. Those are movements working inside the SBC. And my favorite story is this one right here. Our friend David French was invited to speak on a panel at the PCA's annual conference about political polarization, and they kicked him off the panel because he was too politically polarizing. David French. This is what's happening. And by the way, if you're getting angry with me right now, just wait. Everyone gets it in this presentation, okay? And then we have the main line. The main line. For those of you who don't know, the mainline Protestants are Episcopalians, United Methodists, Presbyterians, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, Disciples of Christ, United Church of Christ, American Baptists. Those are the 7 sisters of the mainline, the largest mainline traditions. In the 1950s, there's historians who tell me that over half of all Americans were on the membership rolls of a mainline Protestant church. In the 1950s, my favorite thing is people go, we should go back to the religion of the 1950s. I go, you would hate it. It was all a bunch of mainline Protestants who are a little squishy on theology, really talk about like individual rights and freedoms, but they held the most sway in American politics in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Eisenhower was asked once, do you wish Americans were religious? He said, yeah, but I don't care what kind. That's the kind of religion that was predominant in America in the 1950s. It wasn't evangelicalism. It was sort of a generic mainline Protestant Christianity. And we started doing polling in the 1970s. The mainline's now down to 31%. And then today, the share of Americans who are mainline Protestants is down to 8.5%. Just think about that for a minute. A movement that was 52% of America in 1958 is now 8.5% of America in 2024. It's a movement sliding rapidly toward decline. 5% of millennials and Gen Z identify as mainline Protestants. I mean, they're heading towards extinction very rapidly now. And if you look at denominational records, oh, it's bad. It's not just polls. American Baptists, Disciples of Christ is down 74% since 1987. Evangelical Lutherans down 45. Presbyterian Church USA down 62. Episcopalians down 36. United Church of Christ down 57. United Methodists 40. And that's before the split for the United Methodists. They were 10.1 million in 1968. And today they're about 4.5 million. There used to be a United Methodist Church in 95% of counties in the United States. Not anymore. These are once proud denominations and institutions that don't exist and will not exist in 20 or 30 or 40 years. And this is where it gets even worse. 2% of American adults are mainline Protestants under the age of 40. 2%. I mean, these denominations will not exist, at least not in a meaningful way going forward. The question is why? I think politics is part of it. There's this conception that people have out there when they talk about the main line. People say the liberal main line. It's almost like you have to use the word liberal before main line. Guess what? I fail to see all those liberals up here on this graph. The majority of mainline Protestants, or the plurality of mainline Protestants, have always been Republicans. And you know why they're Republicans? Because they're a bunch of educated, upper middle class white people living in the Midwest. That's who a mainline Protestant is. It's a retired school teacher living in Minnesota. Wow, that's super liberal, right? It's just such a misconception of what the main line is. They've always been politically divided. And I think in many ways that's their strength, but in many ways that's their greatest weakness. And I know this because I was mainline Protestant for 20 years. And I'll tell you what I heard constantly in my life. My Southern Baptist friends would call me too liberal, and my atheist friends would call me too conservative. That's what it's like to be in the middle of the road today. Margaret Thatcher says, you know what happens when you stand in the middle of the road? You get hit by cars coming and going. And that's exactly what's happened to the main line. They are a denomination, a tradition that's always prided itself on political diversity. And what they've gotten for that? Extinction, or coming extinction for sure. But this is a point I want to make. There is exactly one majority white Protestant denomination in America that did not clearly favor Donald Trump on Election Day. And it was the Episcopalians. All 400,000 of them that worship every week. Look at every other denomination. Even those liberal United Methodists, right? 60% of them voted for Donald Trump. I mean, even a lot of these Seven Sisters, ELCA was 51% for Trump. PCUSA was 48% for Trump. And let's not even talk about Assemblies of God at 88% for Trump, or Southern Baptists at 79% for Trump. People are like, oh, there has to be a lot of liberal denominations out there to match the conservative ones, right? No. The answer is no. There are basically one left-leaning denomination in America right now. Let's talk about Catholics. My wife's Catholic. My oldest son's going to be confirmed Catholic on Sunday. I go to Mass. I went to Mass last Sunday. I know a lot about the Catholic Church for a Protestant. Catholics have bounced around 25% of America for a long time, and in the last couple of years, they've dipped down just a little bit. 21% of Americans are Catholic today. Not bad, really, if you sit back and think about it, compared to what else has happened in American religion. And I show this to my Catholic friends. They go, yeah, look at us. And I go, oh, just wait. I've got more graphs. There's always more graphs. And I show them this graph. One of these things is not like the other. While the top number of Americans, you know, the number of Americans who are Catholic has stayed pretty stable, the average Catholic In 1972, about half of them went to Mass on an average Sunday, and now it's less than 25%. So while the top number looks just fine, the number below that number looks even worse because the pews are getting emptier and emptier every single year because Catholics aren't going to Mass. They're cultural Catholics, identify as Catholic because of, heritage, Irish American, Italian American, Hispanic American, not because they actually have sort of a deep, abiding faith in the Catholic Church. And by the way, I also want you to notice the evangelical line has gone up over the last 50 years. Evangelicals are actually more religiously engaged today than they were 50 years ago. It's an important point to make. Talk about, is religion declining in America? You've got to be more specific. What type of religion? Because evangelicals are doing just fine. And here's what's interesting about white Catholics. They were majority Democrats. I mean, the Kennedy coalition, right? That's who John Kennedy's people were white Catholic, working class, blue-collar, union folks in New England. And you can see that white Catholics were 60+% Democrats in the 1970s, and those numbers have gone closer together, and then they flipped. But if you look at actual voting patterns, in 2008, McCain got 55% of the white Catholic vote. Trump in 2024 got 65% of the white Catholic vote. So now, they're not a purple group anymore. They're a red group moving redder over time. You can see it here. 56% among all Catholics are now voting for Republicans, 64% among white Catholics. Look at that non-white Catholic shift, by the way. 40% of non-white Catholics voted for Trump in 2024, up 16 points from the 2016 lows. But here's where it gets really interesting when you look at data about Catholic priests. They interviewed about 2,000 Catholic priests, and this is decade of ordination on the left-hand side. So you can kind of see the older priests versus the younger priests. And this is self-described political views. In the 1980s, priests ordained before 1980 tended to be sort of mixed politically. 38% liberal, 24% conservative, 38% middle of the road. And then for every successive decade of ordination, those red bars get bigger and the blue bars get smaller. And among young Catholic priests, there are basically no political liberals left. And by the way, this is tradition founded on things like social justice, immigrants' rights, Dorothy Day, workers' rights. Those kind of priests don't exist among the young priests in America today. Less than 5% of young Catholic priests identify as politically liberal, and this is theology here. Same question, self-described theological views of priests by decade of ordination. Look, old priests are actually very progressive theologically, and then something happens here, and those red bars get taller and taller and taller, and among priests who have been ordained in the last 5 years, 84% of them say they're conservative, 14% say they're middle of the road, and basically there are no young progressive priests in the pipeline right now. And this is supposed to be the church that reflects America, right? All of us. Well, it reflects some of us, that's for sure. So the Catholic Church is moving to the right as well. And by the way, I love this question because it asks, how do you think the Catholic Church is doing in America? Look at this. Look at the two on the right, the good graph and the poor graph. Look who's the most likely to say the church is doing poor. Very liberal priests and very conservative priests. You know who think the church is doing good? The moderate priests. And I bet I can tell you why that is right now. Because the very liberal priests think the church is too conservative. And the very conservative priests think the church is too liberal. And the people in the middle are like, no, we like it being diverse. But that's what's happening is the church wants to pull itself apart because the liberals want the church to move left and the conservatives want the church to move right. And then the nuns. The share of Americans who are non-religious was 5% in 1972. It was 6% in 1991. Today, the share of Americans who are non-religious is close to 30%. This graph is what made my first book happen. Made a lot of this happen. This one single graph, I think this is the most important social movement in America in the last 50 years. It's changing everything about American life. And we don't even realize half of it because we don't talk about religion enough in this country. I'm trying to change that. But think about this. 30% of Americans are non-religious today in a country of 340 million. That's over 100 million people have no religious affiliation. The largest denomination in America is the Southern Baptist Convention at 12.5 million people. The nuns are 8 times that size. The Catholic Church in America is 62 million. The nuns are 105 million. So this is a humongous group of people, and it's growing every year, and it's changing everything about our politics. But I will say this, there is some evidence in the data that people are not leaving religion as fast as they used to. We've seen sort of a stopping, a stalling out. The last 5 years, the share of Americans who are non-religious is stuck around 30%. The share of Americans who are Christians is stuck around 63%, and that's held for the last 5 years now. But is the share of Americans going to be non-religious 30% in 20 years? Absolutely not. And you know why? It's because old people die. Sorry, everybody. Old people exit the stage, stop being part of the sample, whatever you want to say. And guess who's going to replace those people who die? Generation Z and their kids. And what's going to happen is you're replacing a group that's 25% nuns with a group that's 45% nuns, which means the aggregate number of nuns in America is going to have to go up from 30% unless 12% of millennials find Jesus in the next 5 years, and 15% of Gen Z do the same thing. We're talking about 25 million people coming back to church in the next 20 years just to keep the number at 30%. There is no Gen Z revival, by the way. There is no Gen Z revival. There is no Gen Z revival. I look at data all day. It's not there. But politically speaking, there are groups on these questions that always stand out as outliers from everyone else. And this question asks, should we make it illegal for healthcare professionals to provide someone younger than 18 with medical care for a gender transition? These are people who agree with that prohibition. 84% of white evangelicals agree, 75% of Latter-day Saints, 74% of white Catholics, 72% of Muslims, 67% of the liberal mainline wants to ban gender transition for minors. You know the only two groups that do not agree with that statement? Atheists and agnostics. Atheists and agnostics. They're the only two groups in America who are so far left on this political issue. I love this question because it asks you as a respondent to put yourself in political space between very liberal and very conservative. You've got to put the Republican Party in political space from very liberal to very conservative, and the Democratic Party in political space. Look at that top row. Those gray bars are where atheists put themselves, and the blue are where they put the Democratic Party. They're the only group in the sample that sees themselves to the left of the Democrats or the right of the Republicans. They think the Democratic Party's actually become more moderate over the last 10 years. I've sat through a lot of evangelical sermons. They don't believe that. But they actually believe the Democratic Party is selling out their liberal values. They should actually move further to the left. And they're trying to pull the Democratic Party further to the left because they're further to the left. The agnostics are also further to the left. And you know where they put the Republican Party? Atheists put them almost as far right as they possibly get. Atheists have this perception of American politics that everyone is moderate or conservative except them. They're the only true liberals left. And you can see this in the data. This is the share of atheists who say they are very liberal and the Republican Party is very conservative. So as far polarized they could possibly be, the share of atheists who agree with that was 15% in 2012, and now it's 30%. They see the world perfectly polarized. Perfectly polarized. There was a movement a couple years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, called the New Atheist Movement. It hit my generation like a ton of bricks. These are people like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett. And they actually got their start on YouTube. YouTube. You know, back in our day, kids, we didn't have YouTube. And when YouTube started, one of the most popular kind of genres of videos were new atheists debating Christians on matters of theology. And boy, that was just catnip for my generation for whatever reason. These guys became rock stars, had huge followings, sold millions of books, and seemed like they were everywhere in the culture. And then things started to change with the New Atheist Movement because a couple of them died. That's part of it. But then a couple of them started changing their minds on certain things. For instance, Richard Dawkins wrote a piece called Why Biological Sex Matters, where he makes the shocking revelation that there might only be two genders, male and female. And as you can probably guess, his atheist friends loved that argument. Oh wait, they didn't. Richard Dawkins used his new podcast to promote transphobic lies. Richard Dawkins is stuck with a transphobic podcast. And here's the best part. Richard Dawkins was given the Humanist of the Year award in 1996. They revoked the award 2 years ago because of his position on the issue of gender. So who's the intolerant ones now? You know, for those evangelicals out there, there was a farewell Rob Bell moment about 20 years ago where he got kicked out of the tribe for saying maybe hell doesn't exist. This is the farewell Richard Dawkins moment. And they'll tell me, I talk to my atheist friends all the time, they go, oh, we can't kick anybody out. I go, yeah, we'll invite Richard Dawkins to speak at the American Atheist Association meeting next time. Oh, we would never do that. You're doing the exact same thing you accuse evangelicals of. Exactly the same thing. But when they do it, it's right, by the way. That's what they tell me. And when evangelicals do it, it's because they're wrong. That's where we are in American politics right now, where my side is justified in kicking people out, and your side are bigots for doing the same thing. This is the problem we face. And to make it even weirder, Alice Walker won the Humanist of the Year award in 1997, then said a whole bunch of anti-Semitic things. She wrote The Color Purple, by the way. She said a whole bunch of anti-Semitic things on a podcast, and she still has her Humanist of the Year award. So maybe they have sort of selective ethics on some of these issues. I don't know. See how I'm coming for everybody? You just wait, I'll come for you too if you give me long enough. This is the problem we're facing, is that both sides think they're right and their actions are justified when they're not. So how do we get over all this stuff? Gordon Allport was a fine social scientist who was writing in the 1950s, and he was confronting a problem that social science was confronting full force in the 1950s was, how do we make sure we don't have Nazis ever happen again? Maybe a relevant question, right? And so he wrote a book called The Nature of Prejudice, which is an absolute barn burner, page turner. No, it's not. I'll tell you what's in the book so you don't have to go read it yourself. He proposes this thing called social contact theory. And let me describe to you social contact theory really simply. It's just the simple idea that intergroup contact, under appropriate conditions, can reduce prejudice between majority and minority group members. Basically, if you want to like someone who's different than you, just go hang out with them for a while. That's really as simple as it is. And what's wild about contact theory is it's been tested thousands of times by all kinds of social scientists, and almost every single study supports contact theory. It can reduce prejudice across racial lines, across age lines, across socioeconomic lines, across religious lines. Just by knowing someone who's different, you will be more willing to open up to those people. Now, he said under appropriate conditions. You know what not appropriate conditions are? Prison. That ain't gonna work. But he actually gives a definition and some conditions for appropriate conditions, and here's what they are. Equal status among group members. I don't know about you, but my church, we all were just in this thing together. I was a pastor, but just barely. You know, it was kind of like, what do you guys want to do? Like, let's try that. Common goals that highlight interdependence. Maybe, I don't know, like feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, you know, visiting the prisoner, stuff like that. You might have heard of that stuff before. A focus on cooperation, not competition. I think that describes a lot of houses of worship that I've been a part of. And support of authorities, laws, or customs. Every time my church tried to do something, the government got out of our way. They did everything they could to help us do those things. And this is what church should look like. A lot of people with big teeth. But this is, to me, this is religion at its finest. And I know, like, theologians think about the world theologically. One phrase I heard a lot in graduate school, and I'm sure Dan heard this phrase too, was, if you have a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. And like, first time we were taught regression, we're like, I'm going to regress everything together and find all these connections, and it's going to be awesome. But if you're a theologian, you think everything in the world is a vertical problem, a theological problem. My church, if we preach better and pray more and get revival and do good preaching and do good visitation, then God will come and our church will grow. I'm a sociologist. You know what I think? It's just as much about the horizontal as it is about the vertical, and maybe more in some ways. Not saying it's not about the vertical, but in some ways the community that we're a part of is salvific for us. It can save us from our worst impulses and our worst ideas. It can draw us back together. It can get us over the chasm of doubt and despair. It can move us beyond what I am and go move us toward what we can be. That's what houses of worship are supposed to do. They're supposed to be examples of contact theory, where we just rub shoulders with people. Man, you know how hard it is to hate someone after you take communion with them every Sunday? pretty hard. Because what happens is you see people in 3 dimensions, not 2 dimensions. Boy, when I see people on that computer screen, I have a lot of disdain for them. Then I meet them in person and realize I don't dislike them as much as I thought I did. That's happened a lot recently. There's something about being in contact with people on a regular, everyday basis that makes us realize they might be different than us, they might vote different than us, they might think different than us, but they're not bad people. They're good people. They're working for a common cause just like we are. And unfortunately, what's happening with houses of worship is they become more politically homogenous. Now we look across the other side of the aisle and go, they're all hateful people. They're all terrible people, and we deserve to hate them back. Man, it used to not be that way. It used to not be that way. And I think, Jonathan Rauch wrote a book called Cross Purposes. Jonathan Rauch is a self-described liberal, atheist, gay Jew who wrote a piece in 2008 that said religion's declining in America, good riddance. And then 2 years ago wrote a piece saying that was the dumbest piece I ever wrote in my life. He called American religion a load-bearing wall in American democracy, because he gets it. He understands that the role of the church is more, it's obviously getting people to heaven, helping them find the kingdom and help building the kingdom. But you know what it's also about? Helping us like each other a little bit more, helping us uphold the institutions that hold America together, helping us work through a democratic process. That is a secondary but so important role of American religion, and I feel like we've forgotten all that. My book is about how religion's declining, and that's not just bad for religion, it's bad for all of us. Everyone will be affected by this in one way, shape, or form. Robert Putnam said we're bowling alone. You guys remember this book? Now you know what we're doing? We're tweeting alone. We're Facebooking alone. We're Netflixing alone. And it's killing us. It's killing us. It's killing our democracy. And here's how I know this. The General Social Survey asked the question, generally speaking, would you say that most people can be trusted or you can't be too careful in dealing with people? And all I did was run a simple regression model, religious attendances across this side. As you can see in the 1970s, the blue line across the top, the more you went to church, the more trusting you were of other people. In the 1980s, line go up. 1990s, line go up. Now the line's going down overall, right? Because overall trust is cratering in America, which is a real problem. But going to church made you more trustworthy. And look what happened in the last couple years. The more people go to church, the less trusting they are of other people. You know why I think that's happening? Because when you go to church with people who look like you and think like you and vote like you can dislike the people that are out there. Churches are incubators of pro-social values, democracy values, discussion values. And as we become more politically homogenous, more socially homogenous, it's easier for us to dislike people who don't look like us. And that's the real problem that we're facing right now. So, now that I've got you feeling really good about the future of America, I'm going to go sit over there. And Dan's going to ask some questions, right, Dan? That's fine. Okay, good. Do I need to turn it on? Nope. Oh, cool.
We're all set. Thank you so much, Ryan. I'm going to start off with a question that I'd written down towards the beginning of the presentation, and you kind of stole the thunder from it. So I'm going to pivot a little bit.
You're welcome.
You get a call from a journalist. And they ask you to give them the most important statistic or chart to explain the state of American religion. You can't use the nuns because you just said that was like the most important development. So if you were to say like this is the most important statistic for explaining the state of religion in 2026, what is it?
It's fascinating. So I always say the number one story is the rise of the nuns. The number two story is the rise of the nons. And that's the share of Americans who identify as non-denominational Christian. I didn't put this graph up here, but I have it in other slides. In 1972, the share of Americans who were non-denominational was 3%. Today, it's 14%. Share of Protestants who were non-denominational was 5% in 1972. Today, it's 33%. 1/3 of all Protestants in America are non-denominational, which is a couple things. That's one of the reasons the evangelical numbers actually look as good as they do, because Southern Baptists have cratered in the last 10 years. The only reason the numbers are buoyed, and I think it's such an American idea because it's like we want church to be so local, right? Like we don't like institutions, because when I put money in the plate, it's got to go to some national office somewhere. Who knows what they're doing with it over there? I want the money to stay right here. I think it's so emblematic of the culture that we live in right now, where it's so bottom up and so little top down. I wrote a piece for Asterisk magazine the title they gave was The Demons of Non-Denoms, where I basically rail against non-denoms for like 2,000 words. And I think if you think about what that is, think about what social media has done to us. Besides the algorithms, it's basically given everyone a megaphone in a way that we did not have that 25 years ago. And what that's done is allowed people to sort of build their little kingdoms up, from the bottom up, and allow them to rise to power in ways they would be impossible to do 20 years ago. And that's what a lot of these non-denoms are, right? They actually revel in the fact they didn't ask permission to start a church. Like, God told us to start a church, and so we did. Mark Driscoll, you guys ever heard of Mark Driscoll before? He proudly said the first membership of a church he'd ever been was Mars Hill, Seattle, the church that he founded and raised to about 15,000 people. I didn't need a seminary degree. I just needed God's blessing on my life. And that turned out great, by the way, because that church folded. And 10,000 people were without a church after that happened. That's what's happening in American religion. Is it's anti-institutional, it's de-institutional. It's all bottom up, not top down. And I actually want to write a piece that's going to get me murdered, which is in defense of gatekeeping. We need a little bit more gatekeepers in America. You know, Monica Lewinsky, the great philosopher Monica Lewinsky, once said that everyone deserves a voice, but not everyone deserves a megaphone. And I think about that a lot because social media has given crazy people a megaphone that they would have never had before social media came around. And I think in some ways that's actually leading to where we are today politically and religiously in this country.
I wouldn't have had Monica Lewinsky making an appearance.
Hey, man, I'll bring in some references you can't even believe,
I love
Dan.
it. So you mentioned non-denominational churches as a bright spot right now. You were in a podcast a couple of years ago. I think it was with the Gospel Coalition, and you at one point in the podcast you talked about the role of finances in the future of denominations and how a lot of these mainline traditions. You mentioned the Episcopal Church, especially, and how they're just bleeding members. And yet they're going to survive well past a lot of other denominations for a very specific reason. So I'd like you to maybe explain why that is, but also explain or why, even though we're seeing an uptick in non-denominational churches today, whether or not that's sustainable for maybe the next, looking ahead 50, 60, or 100 years.
Two-part question, Dan. So the main line is basically running on institutional money at this point. Money that was given to them, decades ago. My favorite story about the main line is the Episcopalians were given about 20 acres of property in what we would call Lower Manhattan today by the Queen of England in 1620. They still own 4 acres of Lower Manhattan. And they also own any whale that washes ashore is legally theirs. You can go look this up. I'm not making this up. There hasn't been many whales washing up on the shores of Lower Manhattan recently.
But when it does.
But when it does, call the Episcopalians. They'll come get it. So in 2017, the property rights of the Episcopalians generated about $320 million in revenue. That's not the principal. That's the money they make from renting this space out. And the largest church in that diocese has about 200 in worship on an average Sunday. So, I mean, they're literally drowning in money. I call them zombie denominations because they have money but no people. And so I actually think in many ways that's going to make it harder for them going forward because money is a great way to close a church because you can't fight with the fact the bank account went to zero. That's what my church closed. We didn't have to discuss about, what date are we going to do? It's like, well, when's the money going to run out? Let's close up shop. But when you've got $4 billion in assets, there is no date in which you close up shop. So I think the main line is going to sort of limp along on this institutional money for decades longer than they should. And I've been telling them that they need to actually use this money for, things like church planting. There's some Episcopalian dioceses have taken their money and given it to young priests who are coming out of seminary, I think are interesting and innovative, and say, start a church. We're going to give you money to start that church, and if you need more money, come back. I think that's a good way forward because that's their only opportunity. I think the non-denom train is going to run for a while. Here's what I worry about with non-denoms, and I've said this a bunch, is they have no accountability. At least in like a denomination, if your pastor gets accused of stealing money from the church, you can call someone from the national denomination to come in and investigate that problem who doesn't know you or them or anybody else and get to the right answer to the question. If you are a non-denominational church and that happens, who do you call? The board was all selected by the pastor, probably. Who's the oversight? Who's the adults in the room? You want someone to go tell on themselves? Like hire someone to go investigate them? That's what I worry about. But here's the bigger worry. You know, the SBC had this big scandal about, and the Catholic Church had a big scandal about sex abuse. The reason we know about those scandals is because there were watchdogs for those denominations who told us these things were happening. If all these non-denoms are doing this and there's a pocket here and a pocket there and a pocket there, you know what the media is not going to do? Connect the dots between those three. And we're going to think that's an isolated event over here. That's an isolated event over here. It's never going to make the national news. And people are going to have this odd perception that these non-denoms are somehow better than denominations are just because you don't know what they're really up to. You know, as long as there are people, there's going to be scandal. There's going to be intrigue. And those non-denoms are probably going to... And I think what's going to turn the tide is enough of these stories build up, these stories about lack of accountability, that a lot of people are going to realize, okay, that's just a different, that is probably just as bad, just in a different way than denominations were, and that maybe we should trust institutions just a little bit to get things right. We're not there yet right now, though. I mean, trust is lower than it's ever been.
I'm actually going to turn things over to the audience now, because I imagine you guys have some questions. So go ahead and raise your hand. I'll try to run the mic out. If you have not yet registered or signed up to win a copy of Dr. Berger's latest book, you can do that at the back table before the end of the event. But for now, we'll head to the back for the first question.
I feel like I need to stand up now, because you're standing up, Dan. I'm going to stand up. Okay.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
First of all, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
This is kind of a pastoral question since you used to be a pastor, but it also relates to this topic. I'm wondering, when it comes to times of national mourning that are also connected to politics, what would be your advice in a moderate church? Because I know there have been, several incidents recently.
Yeah.
And then also, like, after Charlie Kirk died, I think there was a lot of debate about how Christians could handle that tragedy in a way that was right.
Yeah.
Also, when there was maybe some, both then and now, some unfair, in my opinion, rhetoric coming from national administration. So, as a church, how would you advise pastors and congregants to handle times of genuine mourning and grief over national issues when narratives nationally are not supportive of nuance?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is, if anyone on social media says, if your pastor didn't talk about Charlie Kirk on Sunday, find a new church, don't listen to those people. Okay, you know what I preached in my church? The gospel. And I follow, here's what, I'm going to throw my hat in on the old lectionary right now. Because if the lectionary is not talking about Charlie Kirk, then I don't have to talk about Charlie Kirk. You get my point? You guys know what the lectionary is, right? It's a set of readings the church has been doing for 500 years. It just tells you what to preach every Sunday. That's a great excuse to not have to worry about those kind of issues. But the second thing I would say is, you got to know your congregation more than I know your congregation. You got to feel through your congregation. There are times when I leaned into politics, and there's times when I leaned out of politics, knowing where my congregation was and knowing where I was at the same time. For instance, I'll never forget the picture of a 3-year-old little Syrian boy who died on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea because his family was trying to come here from war-torn Syria. His little dead 2-year-old body was laying on the shore. I'll never forget that. And I showed it to my church that child was born in the image and likeness of God. We need to remind people of that. I always tell pastors, and I think this is the most important thing, is we need to tell them about biblical eternal principles and then let the people in the congregation figure out what that means in terms of policy. If I tell you that every human being is born in the image and likeness of God, can we differ on what kind of immigration policy America should have? We can and we should, because it's a great country where we can disagree with each other. But if we lose sight that every person, no matter if they're born in Guatemala or Georgia, was born in the image and likeness of God, that is the truth. So you can speak about political issues, but let them connect the dots. Like, for instance, do I think everyone in America should have access to decent, affordable health care? Oh my gosh, yes. But how do we get there? I have no idea. You see the difference? I'm not endorsing a party or a candidate or a policy position. I'm pointing people back to Jesus and saying, here's what the gospel says, and now you need to figure out how it applies to politics. That's how we avoid the day-to-day stuff. One reason I'm a Baptist is because we believe in local church autonomy, priesthood of the believer, which means I don't need anyone to go to God. I can go to God myself, and soul autonomy. You know what that means? I can figure out what the gospel means for me and my own conscience. So I can't tell my people what to believe or when to believe. I can show them how I believe and help them try to model that, but it's on them to figure out how to map that onto policy and parties and positions. And you know what the nice thing is? They can say, Dr. Burge, Pastor Burge, why were you so political from the pulpit? And you can say, I wasn't being political, I was being biblical. I didn't say anything political there. You saw it as political. And that's the way I've always been. You know, I let them connect the dots. I let them draw A's and B's together. I don't tell them you can't vote for this party or you can't vote for that party or Jesus would endorse single-payer health care. You know what Jesus would endorse? People not dying for stupid reasons in a great country. I think we can all agree on that, right? And you know what? My church had one ministry at the end. It was called Brown Bag Friday. We packed 13 items in a brown paper sack on the weekends because my kids go to a public school and 84% of kids in the public school are on free or reduced lunch. And we were being told by the social workers that kids were coming to school on Monday and couldn't learn because they were hungry. We fed hungry kids. You can't get mad at that. You cannot get mad at that. That's what we picked out. One program that was apolitical, non-political, no matter what it was. Find a biblical principle, which is feeding hungry kids, and just do it. If your church wants to get involved in other politics, that's on you and your church. But my approach has always been let them figure it out. I trust my people. And I don't think pastors do that enough. Trust your people. They're smart. And you know what? I also believe that they've all been gifted by the Holy Spirit to figure things out on their own a little bit. So a little guidance from me, and that's it. Right? That's how I would approach it.
Yes.
One thing I wanted to ask about, we have the dwindling numbers you covered quite a bit today. Yeah. Britain went through the same thing for a long period of time, and in the last couple of years, they've risen 58% amongst young people. Have you looked at the correlation into what is possibly changing there that maybe we would eventually get to a point of doing the same thing here?
I'm going to give some really bad news to you right now. Those numbers are probably not right. Pew Research just wrote a big, long piece the other day about survey methodology, which is boring, but it all points to the fact of, like, for instance, there's some polls from Great Britain that says the share of young people believe in God went from 15% to 45% in 3 years. That's impossible. I look at polling all day long. That I would throw that poll out immediately. You don't see that much movement that quickly. It just doesn't happen. So the quiet revival, you know, people talk about in Britain is probably vastly overblown. I mean, but the reality is 4% of British young people went to church 5 years ago, and now it might be 12%. You know what I mean? Like, let's get real about what those numbers actually, let's say the number's actually true, which I don't think it is. You're still 88% of British young people don't go to church on a regular basis. I mean, it doesn't change the culture. Now, if it keeps going that way, I think it would. But, I mean, right now, I think it's way too early days of saying there's any sort of revival happening in Europe. Now, I have good data on, like, 34 countries in Europe, and I think what's happening is secularization has stopped in Europe. They're not secularizing like we are. Like it stopped. There's a leveling off. Attendance has not changed that much in the last couple of years, but there's definitely no evidence of a sort of widespread revival happening in anywhere in Europe at this point, really anywhere in the world at this point as far as I can tell. So I hate to be a bummer, but data is what data is.
In a political scenario such as our own, in which many political positions are underpinned by strongly held theological positions, and I'm speaking of political positions on both conservative and liberal sides, doesn't political compromise essentially become a form of theological compromise? And does this explain some of the division that we're seeing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's actually been a very robust debate in political theory of whether, hardcore religious beliefs are actually incompatible with democracy. You know, there's a great literature out there called the Twin Tolerations that asks the question, is Islam incompatible with Western democracy? And I would even add to that, is fundamentalist Christianity incompatible with American democracy? And I think you could make an argument at some point where if your pastor says, if you compromise on this issue at all, then you're an apostate, you're a heretic, you're giving up on the faith. I live in the real world where we have to compromise to get things done. And you got to think about it, okay? So if your position is that compromising, political compromise is theological compromise, and we can't compromise, then what you're really asking for in America is three possible options. Well, two possible options. One is to force legislation down our throats that's not very popular. We tried that with prohibition. It didn't turn out so good. Right? The idea of like the law is a teacher and can teach us the right way to live. Yeah, a whole bunch of people were drinking bootleg whiskey because the law was not teaching them anything except how to avoid breaking the law and getting caught. So you can't hoist an idea upon people and they go, oh, it's fine, we'll change our entire behavior because the law changed. That's not what happens. So that's one possibility. I would disagree with that strongly. The other possibility is burn it all down. And that's the one that scares me the most of all, is there is a growing number of people, there's a theory in political science called agents of chaos theory. There's a growing number of Americans who believe the best possible outcome is for American democracy to fail. Because whatever comes after that will have to be better than the current system that we have. It's like the Joker scenario. I want to watch the world burn. Like there's a growing number of people who think the system we live in is so terrible that whatever comes after this could not be worse. And let me tell you, that is the dumbest position I've ever heard of in my life, because if you've ever studied any country that's gone through a democratic transition, it is awful. I mean, lawlessness in the streets, starvation, disease, rampant inflation. Like, if you want people to hurt and suffer, that's the path you should take. And by the way, if it happened to us, it wouldn't just affect 340 million Americans. It'd affect every person living on this planet would suffer because of that. Because you don't like the current political system that we have. Let's make 8 billion people suffer. These people have not carefully thought about what they're doing. You know what I propose in this theological compromise thing is? If you think your theology is correct and you believe it in your heart, it's the most self-evident theology, then convince 51% of us that you're right. That's what I believe. Because if you would have gone to Alabama in 1820 and said, hey, that black person is a person, not a piece of property, you have been laughed off the town square. Or a crazy idea, like women should have the right to vote just like men do in 1850 in America. You've been laughed out of many towns. And now we all accept both those things as being absolutely unequivocally true. And you know why? Because the arguments were good. And they convinced us they were right. If you believe that abortion is murder, and I don't know if it is or not, but if you believe that, convince us that you're correct. Convince us. Because you know what? I've looked at the data over and over again. The share of Americans who are pro-choice has gone up over the last 50 years, not down. And if your argument is so good, why is it so unconvincing to people? I mean, really ponder that for a minute. Really ponder that. Because a lot of my pro-life friends will act like their argument is the most self-evident argument ever. Then why do most people not see the self-evidence of your argument? Make a better argument and convince us that you're right, and then we'll all vote for your position and we'll all move together as a democracy. That's what theological compromise looks like, is convince me that you're correct, because we do not live in the kingdom of heaven. We live in the United States of America, which is the greatest democracy the world's ever seen. Highly problematic. Right? You don't get what you want. But if you refusing to compromise leads to millions of people suffering, is that the price you're willing to pay to feel right about something? Because it's not for me. That's not the price I want to pay. I'd rather have compromise and make our democracy work as opposed to doing those other two options I just told you about. That's what I would tell anyone, no matter what your position is, whether it be there 3 genders, or that 2 men can get married, or that abortion is murder, or that women shouldn't have the right to vote. Convince us that you're right. Convince us. Using this great thing called the marketplace of ideas. Free speech is the greatest thing we ever gave the world. Use it. Convince me, because right now I don't see any convincing arguments on either side of those issues, and that's the problem. Sorry, I got a little preachy there for a second. Apologies.
Hello. I have a short question.
I have a short answer then.
It might be a long answer, I don't know.
I don't know how to give short answers.
So, how do you make a homogeneous or a politically homogeneous church less homogeneous? It almost seems like an irreversible process. I don't know.
So this is actually the biggest flaw in my book is political homogeneity is really good for an organization and really bad for democracy. Do you get my point here? It would be so much easier to pastor a church where everyone thought the same, voted the same, believed the same. All a bunch of 60-year-old white people vote Republican would be a delight to pastor. You can just talk about how white people are great and old people are great and Medicare is great. It'd be fantastic. I think part of the problem, though, is we don't see who's not there. And I don't think the church has actively pushed out those other people. I just think it happened naturally. So I actually wouldn't put it on the church to solve the problem. What I really want to happen is a lot of people read my book and go, man, I'm a Christian, but I just can't find a church that I really want to go to. And maybe Ryan's argument's not that bad. Maybe I should actually show up at some point and just be part of a church. The problem I face is I call it the you go first problem. Everyone's sitting around on the sidelines going, hey, you go first. And like, no, you go first. But imagine if we all did that at the same time, right? Where we all just said, hey, this Sunday, I'm going to go to a church. I'm going to sit in the back, and I'm not going to talk to anybody, but I'm going to be there. And 10 of you did that on one Sunday. You know what happened almost naturally over a couple months or years? That 10 would become 20, and that 20 would become 40, and that 40 would become 80. Because it would start a movement that we've never seen before. And so what I'm trying to do is convince these people like me, by the way, I don't want to go to church some Sundays. Actually, most Sundays I feel like I don't want to go to church anymore. But if I looked at all the evidence that I've looked at over the course of my career, all the positive benefits of going to church, and I didn't go, I'd be the biggest hypocrite on the planet. And I think we need to understand that going to church is good for you. Just pick a church too. Do I love the church I go to right now? No, I'm not Methodist, but I go to a Methodist church and they make me mad. Because they got boards and meetings and committees and all this bureaucracy nonsense. And I'm like, who can be a pastor? Well, they got to tell you if you're a pastor. No, we're Baptists. We figured it out. But you know what? I go and I show up. You know why? Because there's a bunch of good people who love Jesus and love the kingdom. That's it. That's the reason I'm there. And you know what I do? I sit, they're front and there's like wings on each side. I sit in the very back corner of the right-hand side wing and no one sits within 30 feet of me. And I'm the first one out on Sunday morning. But every once in a while, I'm not. Every once in a while, I'll linger and talk to somebody, talk to the pastor, talk to fellow congregants. And you know what I've realized over time? I'm actually better for that. It's this thing that we do that we don't even realize. I do this thing over and over again in my life where I agree to go do something social. And like an hour before I have to go be social, you know what I think? I'm going to cancel this. This was dumb. Why does past me hate present me? I think about that all the time. I sign myself up for stuff I really don't want to do, and then I get ready and I go out and we go do something fun and I come back home and I'm like, man, I'm glad I did that. And you know what I do a week later? Go through the exact same process again because I am an idiot. But I've convinced myself that sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do for a greater good. And for me, that's going to church on Sunday morning. Sometimes you just have to show up. Just be there. And not to be too spiritual, but that's when the Spirit moves. That's when the magic happens. That's when the time you want to go the least is the time you should go the most. That's when something changes because I believe that God honors us when we just show up. I think that's a God-honoring thing to do. So my argument is not for the church to do that. It's for people to do that. For them to do the hard thing. To do the thing that culture tells them not to do. And join something. Be part of something. Be social. Go out. Because that's what we need as a country. And by the way, I don't care where you go, what kind of church you go to either. It makes no difference to me as long as you go on a regular basis, which is not going to make the JB family very happy. But if you want to go Catholic, mainline, Muslim, Jewish, I don't care. I just want you to be part of something, be part of a community. The vast majority of people will be better because of that over the long haul. I really do believe that. Other questions?
We're going to make this the last question.
Oh, this better be a good one.
Oh, this will be good.
Oh, no. Now I'm nervous. It's time for the altar call.
Yeah, right. What part does the gospel play in the answer to all of this?
Oh. Here's what I know. You give me a chance to preach. I love that. I know how it ends, and this is not the end. It's not. It can't be, because I know how it ends, and this is not. And I'll just say this. America has survived everything that we've thrown at it for 250 years. We survived the Revolution, the War of 1812. We survived the Civil War. We survived Reconstruction. We survived 2 world wars. We survived the Civil Rights Movement. We survived 9/11. If this what takes us down, we were never as good as we thought we were. Because I know how it ends, and this is not it. I mean, we're better than this. And God called us to be better than this. I mean, when I understand the gospel, what I understand is a Christ that came to save everyone, whether you're Democrat or Republican, whether you vote for Harris or Trump, whether you didn't vote at all, that God came to save you. But I also understand something very important, which is I believe that Jesus saved me, but the members of First Baptist Church also saved me at the same time. Because they believed in me. You know, because they showed up every Sunday and listened to me blather on about me trying to figure out the gospel. When I had 2 kids, they're the ones who brought pots of stew home for us when we came home from the hospital with our newborn babies. That saved me. You know, that moment made me realize that that community of people was as important as my relationship with Jesus Christ, because they showed me Christ's love through that. That's what's salvific. When I lost my job at EIU, we had no health insurance. The church stepped up and paid for our health insurance for 6 months, didn't even ask a question, didn't even ask if we could or should, just did it for us. That's what saved me in many ways. And I think we understand that Jesus Christ saves our souls, but sometimes it takes that affirmation of that community to save us as well. It takes us over those chasms of doubt and despair and the worst moments of our life. I can't imagine trying to be a Christian without those people. That's where Jesus is. You know, he works this way, but he also works this way as well. And listen, I do believe in the vertical dimension of church, but man, that horizontal dimension has meant more to me some days than the vertical dimension ever could. You know, I believe because you believed in me is one of the most powerful things I can say, right? Anne Lamott said the most 2 powerful words in the English language are, me too. You're struggling? Me too. You're doubting? Me too. You're not having a good day today? Me too. You know, your relationship with your kid's not great? Me too. And in some ways, that is just as important as anything else. And that's where Jesus comes in through this whole thing. You find Jesus in and through the community. Not to get too far theological, whoever wrote the book of Luke also wrote the book of Acts. We know that because it's the same, the authorship is the same. And the reason those 2 books are actually together is because what Jesus wanted us to know is, while that salvation did happen with the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that salvific work is carried through the work of the church in the book of Acts, which is us today. We are the saving instrument of God's grace. That's what our God, and listen, that is the greatest responsibility we ever had, but the greatest joy at the same time. If the church is what got us into these problems we're facing, guess what? It's the church that can get us out of it too. And I really do believe that. And it's not the end, because I know how the end ends, and this is not it. It is not it. Thank you guys so much. Yeah. Really appreciate it.
So we do have a book to give away, and Ryan, I'll let you do the honors of picking the winner here. He has not seen these submissions, so this is not rigged.
I was going to make a 2020 election.
Yeah, don't worry about it. No, we're not going to do that. The winner is...
Carly Owl? Oh.
Carly. All right, Carly. Well, this is awkward. The book's at the back. Yeah. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm sure Dr. Burge will stick around and answer any questions you guys might want. But
like church, I'm leaving out the...
Okay, that's right. He's gone. No. See you all next time. Thank you.